Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to, well, what is this? Live recordings. I haven't done a live recording in a while. I've here a while. Let's do some live recordings. If you've never joined me for live recordings before, basically I'm going to record some skill videos live, and we're going to have some fun with it. I believe I need to finish the Druid fire skills, which is something that I had been putting off for a long time. And now that I finally have leveled up a Fire Druid, why not have some fun with it? So we've got quite a few Druid fire skills to go over, and we can talk about the effectiveness of those skills, like what they're good for, what they're not good for, like how to beef them up, that sort of thing, like whether I like them or not, which I actually have some extreme disdain for Firestorm. But we'll talk about that as well. There's a lot of interesting things to go over when it comes to the Fire Druid, and I definitely do feel like we've got some work cut out for us today. So basically, how does live recordings work? Well, I'm going to do my intro. I'm going to record the video, and then when I record the video, I'm going to obviously, do my spiel or whatever. I'm probably going to ignore what you guys are talking about for the most part, and then eventually I will, of course, go into. I will go into the outro and then play the outro, and then that'll be the end of that particular video. So we're going to have fun recording some videos today. Once I finish up the Druid, which actually shouldn't take too long because I believe I am mostly finished with the Druid. I've done the majority of the Druid skills except for like a handful other than the fire. So we should be able to finish that today, and then we can maybe work on the Paladin a little bit. That sounds like fun. There definitely are some skills on the Paladin I have not finished yet. Gotta go get Taco Hell's Doojank. I got Mr. Dusty Buns with me today. This is not Nimoy. This is Mr. Dusty. Hello, Mr. Dusty Buns. You're gonna be a good boy today. He's turned into a heckin' chonker boy. He got a big chonker tummy. Look at that big chonker boy. Get the big chonka chonks. That's right. I said you got the chonka chonks. What you gonna do about it, chonka chonk? Chonka chonka lonk. Said that's not a chonka chonk. Don't talk to me that way. Tell me as a chonka chonk is not very nice. Chonka chonk. Chonka 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 chonk. Oh yeah, that's right. If I'm doing skills and abilities, I need to be on the other side. I forgot. I always do this, and I always mess stuff up because I'm always in the way. I'm always in the way. Let's move myself over to this side. We will flip ourselves so that it actually looks like we're paying attention to what we're doing. And that should fix that for the most part. All right, so the first skill we're going to do is going to be Firestorm, the one that I don't like. Let's pull up Firestorm on Amazon Basin real quick. And usually what I like to do is I usually like to go over and kind of refresh my memory on how the skills work and everything. And that way I can, remember everything correctly. So displayed fire damage per second is calculated based on 3 fires, applying their bit rate every frame of a second. 3 times bit rate of 25 divided by 256. Each fire actually applies its bit rate for just 14 frames. However, it's been observed that up to 5 fires apply to size 1 targets, up to 9 apply to size 2 targets, and up to 14 can apply to size 3 targets. So it looks like it does more damage versus larger targets than it does versus smaller targets. Due to its comparatively short delay, Firestorm will be cast at least once per second, and faster cast can increase that frequency slightly. Actual fire damage per second can be up to twice that displayed for up to size 2 targets, and triple that for displayed for size 3 targets. Actual fire damage per second is missile bit rate. Ooh, well, it's kind of complicated there. Each missile spawns static fires in the 3rd frame after casting and every other frame thereafter until expiry, spawning 19 fires each, or 57 in total. These fires apply damage. Fires 3 piercing missiles that leaves trails in their wake. Each of these missiles travels for 40 frames, 1.6 seconds. The central missile travels in a straight line toward the target, while the other two follow more random paths. However, when cast continuously, the 3 missiles will follow the same paths each time if the pointed target doesn't change positions. Interesting. So basically, the damage output of the ability is actually 1/3 of what it actually states, because the majority of the time, only one of the 3 pyres will ever actually hit a target. However, if you're standing directly in front of the target, within melee range, basically, the target will get hit by more than 1 pyre at a time, and if it's a size 3 target, you can potentially hit that target with up to 14 pyres at any given time, if you can cast fast enough, of course, because it's only 3 pyres per cast, with a, a maximum time of 1.6 seconds. I'm not really sure how the hell you could even get 14 effects attacking the same target at the same time with a 1.6 second travel time. But we'll talk about that as well. Alright. I think I got pretty much everything I need, so let's go ahead and start this. Alright. 3, 2, 1, let's jam. Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. I'm joined with me today by Mr. Dusty Buns, Mr. Dusty Bones. He's going to hang out with me today while I'm doing my Skills and Abilities videos. And we're going to be talking about some of the Druid Fire skills. I know you guys have been waiting for the Druid Fire skills for forever. And I know, I put it off. You know why I put it off? Because I wanted to actually do a full playthrough on the Fire Druid, and then they did the next hit delay changes, and like, I'm kind of glad that I did wait, because now the skills have changed dramatically. Now, not this particular one, but some of them. Firestorm is the one that we're going to be talking about today, and Firestorm is one of the only 2 abilities within the tree that are purely fire. So this is something that's important to note. Sorry. Is that Molten Boulder is physical and fire. Fissure is fire. Volcano is physical and fire, and Armageddon is physical and fire. So it's important to note that there's only 2 pure fire skills in the entire tree, and Fissure and Firestorm are those 2. Firestorm is the one we're going to be talking about today, and Firestorm is not my favorite. There's some specific reasons why I don't particularly like Firestorm, and one of them is just, number one, it's really random in the way that it paths. So you always have one that seems to go straight. So only one will always go straight. And the other 2 just follow whatever design they want to. It also doesn't last very long. So it tends to be pretty low in the duration of the ability. It also has a casting delay of 0.6 seconds, which means that it's not going to be something that you can spam as quickly as you would like. In fact, none of the fire skills are spammable. All of the fire skills have some sort of delay on them. 0.6 seconds for Firestorm, 1 second for Molten Boulder, 1.6 seconds for Fissure, 6 seconds for Volcano, and Armageddon is a constant use ability, not something that you spam anyway. So in general, when it comes to spamming abilities, there's really not a whole lot of ability spam when it comes to each individual Fire Druid skill. In fact, you usually end up using all of them, which is how you avoid, the downtime between all of the individual effects that go on. Because, if you're utilizing your Volcano, and you're utilizing your Molten Boulder, and you're using your Fissure, you kind of have downtime on all the abilities at some point or another, as the abilities all go red. And so it's pretty much just a matter of spamming everything. But when it comes to this specific ability, and that is Fissure, Firestorm. Firestorm actually doesn't put its damage properly on the screen. So it says 6,074 to 6,714 damage per second. But what it really means is 6,074 to 6,714 damage for all 3 of the snakes. So each snake is 1/3 of the fire damage, not each snake being the full fire damage, which makes it actually a lot worse than what's stated here. Because if you take 6,000 and divide it by 3, you end up with a lot less damage than 6,000 for each doojank. Now, there is some usefulness to the ability in that it actually synergizes well with Armageddon. So with Armageddon, as you can see, it really only hits around you in a circle. It's a very close range ability, very similar to the way that Hurricane works. You kind of have to be within range for it to actually hit the targets, otherwise it's not really going to do anything. Anybody standing, outside of this radius is essentially taking no damage whatsoever, and so you're kind of screwed. And the same thing goes for Firestorm. So Firestorm has a rather short range. It doesn't go very far. As you can see, I'm standing at the entrance to the Bloodmoor, and I fire it off, and it will not even pass, really, the torches here. It kind of dies right at the torches. And depending on the pathing of the ability, which is also terrible, the pathing sometimes kind of makes weird, like twizzly, swizzly things, like doesn't really quite go in a straight line. So if it goes in a straight line, it goes further, but if it goes ziggy-zag, it actually takes less, distance, and it actually goes even less distance. But you will note that one in the center will always hit the target. So at the very least, with Firestorm, you are looking at 1/3 of the rated damage will always hit whatever target you were aiming it at, as long as you are close enough to actually hit the target. But getting maximum damage of the ability from the ability requires that you're close, so that you can actually make sure that all of the tines of the Firestorm ability are hitting the monster at the same time. And I'd like to pull up Amazon Basin real quick, because Amazon Basin has some more information on this, which is actually pertinent to the damage output of the ability. So if we go to Amazon Basin, you will see that Amazon Basin talks about the size of the monster having to do with how much damage the ability can output. So what this means is if I am standing directly in front of a monster, I mean like, hugging his leg, and I'm using this ability with as fast as I can possibly cast it, there is a certain amount of damage that can be applied to each size target. 5 fires can apply to a size 1 target, which means that size 1 targets, like Rakanishu and little spike fiends and things like that are the smaller monsters, take the least amount of damage from these abilities. Medium-sized monsters can have up to 9 effects apply to them at the same time, and these are size 2 monsters. The largest size monsters, which is your size 3 targets, like Diablo and Pit Lords and Urdars and things like that, can have up to 14 fire effects hit them at the same time, which means that size 3 monsters tend to take the larger amount of damage from Firestorm than anything else. Now, faster cast can help you a little bit here so that you can spam it, but keep in mind that there is always going to be a cast delay added to the ability. So how does the cast delay work exactly? Well, if we take a calculator, I can show you 0.6 seconds. So we take 25, which is the number of frames per second, and we subtract 40%, which is going to give us a remainder of 15, which means that there is always going to be a 15 frame addition to whatever your cast rate is. However, this is not the end of the equation. It's not just 15 frames. It's 15 frames plus whatever your cast speed currently is. So if you pull up the faster cast breakpoints for the Druid, and you have, say, like a 7 frame casting speed, then you have to take your 15 and you have to add 7 to it, which means that you have a 22 frame cast. And this, of course, is going to be across the board on all of these skills. So each delay is going to be a static addition to the cast speed, in addition to your normal cast speed. Now, increasing your faster cast rate by adding things like Heart of the Oak will give you a pretty nice bonus. So as you can see here, my cast speed has definitely increased from Mang Song's, which only has 30%, and I'm not getting the 34% from the Spirit anymore. So now you can notice a small difference but it's not going to be an amazing difference. And in this way, the Fire Druid tends to be very poor when it comes to any kinds of faster cast. You definitely want to have faster cast on a Fire Druid, but it's not your main focus. And you definitely don't want to go balls to the walls, so to speak, and stack out your faster cast to the point where you have an insane level. Just get a decent amount and don't worry about it too much. Because quite honestly, when it comes to the Fire Druid, your faster cast rate isn't going to have a massive effect on the casting speed of these abilities. And when it comes to Firestorm specifically, you might not even use it. So let me explain myself. Why would I say that you're not going to use Firestorm? Well, two of the main damage abilities for this tree are Fissure and Volcano. These abilities can be cast at range, can be cast directly underneath of the target, and you honestly don't even have to be there for them to dish out damage. So for instance, let's say I'm running along, and let's say this torch represents a monster. If I'm running along, I can potentially just cast like this, and I can just move about my day. This will dish out massive damage to that particular monster, because the Volcano will dish out a lot of damage, and the Fissure will dish out a lot of damage, and these two abilities synergize very well together, because they are abilities that you can cast directly on a target, and you can move about your day. You don't have to stand there and actually fight the monster. Firestorm, on the other hand, is an ability that requires you to literally be within melee range, and to spam it like this. Now, when you are in melee range with this ability, you'll notice that all three of the tines are definitely hitting the torch, because all three are going to come out at basically the same point, and so you're going to get a pretty massive damage bump on this particular target. But if I was, say, over here, and I cast Fissure and Volcano on the target, you'll notice that Firestorm doesn't even reach the target. It's something that is kind of terrible when it comes to using Volcano and Fissure. And Fissure is by far the best damage ability that you have. It's pretty much the Blizzard of the Fire Tree. So it really kind of sucks that Fissure doesn't work with this. Now, what ability does? Well, you could use Molten Boulder instead. So in this particular situation, if I was doing this, I could throw Molten Boulders out, and the Molten Boulders will still hit the target. As you can see, Molten Boulder has a longer range. It also fires straighter and is more likely to actually hit the target. It also has a fire effect, which appears on the ground, which has a nice little radial. So it tends to work better with Volcano and Fissure, but not the most amazing. The two skills that synergize best with Firestorm is Armageddon. So Armageddon requires you to be in melee range. So in the same situation here, where I'm using my Volcano and my Fissure on the monster, notice Armageddon's not doing anything either. So if I want Armageddon to dish out damage, I've got to be close. And if I want Firestorm to dish out damage, I've got to be close. So Firestorm and Armageddon tend to go very well together. They work really good as melee abilities, which is kind of silly for a caster, especially for me to say it that specific way. But Firestorm really is kind of a melee ability. And so is Armageddon. They're both abilities that are meant for you to use within melee range of monsters, because to get any real good effect out of them, you have to be close. The closer you are, the better with both abilities. So whereas Armageddon will, occasionally hit a target at its maximum distance, it's definitely going to hit a target more often in close range. And where Firestorm can potentially hit a target at its maximum range, it's definitely going to get more damage if you are closer to the target. So when you're using Firestorm, if you're going to use Firestorm, you want to be literally humping the monster's leg. And that's one of the reasons why I don't particularly like it, because the Fire Druid's not a particularly tanky beast. Like, he's not the kind of character that wants to get in there and hump a monster's leg. So you end up in these really weird scenarios where you're kind of like trying to get close enough to get good use out of Firestorm, but it's not really working out the greatest. And quite honestly, I usually ended up using Molten Boulder anyway. Now, did I still use Firestorm? Yes, I would still use Firestorm. I would cast it in between all the other abilities. So if I was utilizing my Volcano, my Fissure, and my Molten Boulder, what I would do is I would just wait until they were all on cooldown, and Firestorm would come out basically afterward, as a kind of like an afterthought. It is something, unfortunately, that you have to synergize, though. So let's talk about that for a minute. So the fire tree has this really weird thing going on where everything synergizes with everything. And it's kind of an issue. So if you want to build Firestorm, well, you have to build Molten Boulder and Fissure, right? Well, if you want to build Molten Boulder, you got to build Volcano and Firestorm. Okay, well, if I want to build Volcano, then I got to build Armageddon, Fissure, and Molten Boulder. And if I want to build Armageddon, then I've got to build Fissure, Firestorm, Molten Boulder, and Volcano. And if I want to build Fissure, I got to build Firestorm and Volcano. And it's just an endless cycle of, okay, well, if I want maximum damage from any of my abilities, I'm pretty much going to have to build everything. Especially considering that everything has such a long cooldown. Like, for instance, even if I did want to just build Volcano, I would still have to build the 3 synergies, but it has a 6-second duration with a 4-second casting delay, which means that I'm just going to sit there going like, Volcano, 1, 2, 3, 4. Volcano, 1, 2, 3, 4. Volcano. It's really boring gameplay. And the entire fire tree seems to be built around the idea that, well, hey, you know, while you're waiting on Volcano, you could probably cast a Fissure. And while you're waiting on Fissure, you could probably cast a Molten Boulder. And while you're waiting on Molten Boulder, you could probably cast a Firestorm. And while you're waiting, you know, and now that you've cast Firestorm, well, guess what? Volcano's now no longer on cooldown. You can now spam that again. So you can get good use out of everything if you spam everything all at the same time. And it's a really heavy point investment. I mean, we're talking about 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 points to max out this tree. And that's assuming that you don't spend any points pretty much anywhere else, which you're going to want to. You're going to want a little tanky bear, you know, to keep you safe. You're going to want like an oak sage for the extra life. And you may even want to grab a solar creeper so you can get your mana regeneration without having to use a meditation pole arm. And so you're in a situation where you're just going to have to spend basically every point you have into this tree. One of the things I would like to see them change, developers, if you're listening, is I'd like to see you rework the synergies just a little bit so that some of these skills can be built independent of the others. It's not necessarily like the most important thing, but like say I wanted to build Fissure, maybe make it so that I could actually just build Fissure and not have to build everything alongside of Fissure. You know, like maybe if I wanted to do Fissure Volcano, that would be a really good combination. Because as we were talking about earlier, Fissure and Volcano synergize well together. Firestorm and Armageddon synergize well together. So link together Firestorm and Armageddon. That would be a good combination. And if you rework these just a little bit, you might free up to the point where you wouldn't have to spend 100 skill points to get an effective build out of the fire tree. I think that's pretty much all that needs to be said about Firestorm. It's not the most amazing skill, but it does do pretty good damage to a single target if they are a size 3 monster. And that means bosses. So when you're fighting a boss, you should probably be humping his leg if you can. And if you can't hump the monster's leg, well, you might be better off with Molten Boulder, because Molten Boulder just does better damage than Firestorm in any situation where you can't get close enough for Firestorm to dish out its maximum damage. And that's really all there is to it. Anyway, as always, I'd appreciate you guys and gals watch my videos, even when we spend 16 minutes talking about Firestorm. And as always, keep watching. Synergies ruined Diablo 2. I would have to agree. So, when Synergies first came out, when they were first released a long time ago, I was excited for them just like most people were, because it could be potentially beef up a skill. Alright? But here was the problem. They didn't just add synergies. What they did is they increased the health, the defense, and the overall tankiness of all of the monsters in the game to account for the synergies. So let me actually restate that, because you may not have understand what the hell I said. They gave you bonus damage, right? Wrong. They did not give you bonus damage. The synergies do not actually represent bonus damage to the monsters, because all they did was they added synergies and then beefed up the monsters to the point where the synergies didn't matter. Okay? So all of the monsters in the game got more health and became tankier with more resistances to completely cancel out the effects of the synergy bonuses. This basically made it so that the synergy bonuses were required to hit the same level of damage that you had before without them. It was a 100% nerf to the way the game worked, not a good thing. And as I look back on it, I actually realized that synergies actually made the game worse, not better. They didn't make skills viable that were no longer viable before. They just simply took a skill that was already viable and made it into something where you had to spend more points to get the same exact effect that you were getting before without those points. In other words, in this particular case, with Firestorm, Molten Boulder, Fissure, Volcano, Armageddon, etc., in the previous version of the game, before the synergies were added, if this character, I don't even remember if this character ever existed before synergies at all, but before synergies were added, I could have built Firestorm by itself, and Firestorm would have still did a respectable amount of damage, equivalent to what it does now with the synergies. But the problem is that now I have to build the synergies to get the same damage that I had before without them. So Firestorm now costs me 20, 40, 60 points. In the previous version of the game, without the synergies, I could get the same damage with 20 points. All right? So all they did really was they forced you to have to spend more points to get the same damage effect. Now, I'm not opposed to synergies because synergies are part of Lord of Destruction. Okay? The Lord of Destruction expansion set was designed around synergies, and that's fine. What I am not okay with is classic Diablo having synergies. Okay? Classic Diablo is not supposed to have synergies. And I don't know what world they came up with where classic Diablo has synergies, but classic Diablo was never balanced around synergies, and classic Diablo is ruined by them. You literally cannot even play classic Diablo properly the way that it was when it originally launched, because the addition of the synergies into classic Diablo basically ruined it. There are tons of examples that I could give you, but classic Diablo was designed around no synergies. And it made for some very interesting build options. It made for some very interesting characters. You could create multi-spec sorceresses. You could bypass elements much easier. But the game was different. It was a much different game in the classic version of the game. And that's one thing that I really would like to see. I would really like them to take this away, is I would like them to go back to the classic version of Diablo 2 Resurrected and rip those synergies out. Return Diablo 2 Resurrected Classic to its classic form without the synergies, pre-synergies, because it doesn't feel like Classic with synergies in Classic. It feels like Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction with some nerfs. Like, it just feels like I'm a Diablo 2 LOD character with a bunch of nerfs. My mercenary doesn't work anymore. I've got no charms. I literally can't hardly do anything in Classic to actually make the character feel like Classic. And one day maybe we'll have to boot up Classic Diablo. I'll have to actually install like the original version of the game or something and get like maybe like one or two updates to like maybe version 1.05 or 1.06 or something. And we'll run through Diablo 2 Classic like in the original way, before the synergies were added and before everything. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Boop. That was not who I wanted to hop on. Taco Hill. Cause I was born to be a Taco Hill, cause at least I know I'm free. And I got a Chinchilla, and he likes to fart on me, and he gladly stand up and fart on you, cause that's what Chinchillas do. They fart on everyone and everything. Mr. Chinchu, what are you doing, sir? With your little hands, your little grabby hands. Your little grabby hands, get to do the little grabbies. A little grabby hands. I still got my original disc. I don't know if it'll read them, though. The biggest issue I had with Diablo 2 back in the day was getting the frickin' CD-ROM drive to recognize the disc. I would have the CD, I would have the code, everything would be inputted properly. I wasn't using a bootleg disc. And it would just be like, cannot recognize CD. Blah, 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 blah. Your butt stinks. And I would just be like, okay, well, that's rude. And then what we ended up doing was we had to actually copy the disc. So we would go through a clone CD program. We would actually copy the original CD, and we would burn it in a 1-for-1 ratio, which basically meant that it would copy the disc exactly as it was, and not try and like rearrange the data or anything. And then we would put the copy in there, and the copy would work for a little while. It would work for like a month or two, and then the copy would stop working too. Like it was like a couple scratches on the disc, and then it just wouldn't read. It just wouldn't read the disc anymore. And I still have a couple copies of the original CD. How did you do that? How did you get a turd in my shirt, you little turd monster? Little turd monster. Oh, we bought several new versions of the game back in the day. We didn't even need to, but we had several copies that we purchased just so we could get another disc, because the discs would just always eventually stop working. The copyright protection was an issue. And I remember at one point or another, we got so tired of the copyright protection problems that we would, we actually would download the no CD cheats, which was the, so you didn't have to have the CD to launch the game, which only worked for like one version until they patched it out, and then we'd have to go find another no CD cheat. I might be able actually to find a no CD patch for 1.06 now that I think about it. They're probably. I mean, that, like, if I'm using a static version and I'm not updating the game, I probably could get a no CD patch easily for 1.06. Sounds like something we'll have to get set up. Maybe I'll try to install it on an alternate computer. Maybe install it on this one. Maybe we'll see if we can get it to set up properly. Yes, sir. Are you okay, little crack cocaine hamster? Well, it's because it's 640 by 480. Will you stop trying to chew on my stuff? I know you got teeth, and I know they for chewing, but that doesn't mean you chew on my stuff. Don't chew on my stuff. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. I already did a Hydra build for Paladin. I'm pretty sure that video is up on my channel already. I'm pretty sure if you type in Hydra Paladin D2, my video probably comes up near the top somewhere. There's a couple of them. Hmm. Well, never mind. My video is not coming up on the rankings at all. However... I know it was a theory craft. Hold on. It was probably a live theory craft at that. Theory. Did I not label it? Is that what happened? Maybe I didn't label it. Boom, 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 boom. Huh. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even see it on the list. Elemental Necro. Metamorphosis Druid. GGM Porcupine. Plague Amazon. Frosty Cheeks. The Easter Bunny. The Godsealer. I know for a fact I did it. Like, I'm 100%, like, I know. I know I did it. I know I did. I don't remember where it is, but I did it. If I could spell Hydra correctly ever. We'll go inside then. Little turd boy. Ain't nobody tell you couldn't go. Ain't nobody said. Doom 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 doom. Well, I know I did it. I don't know when I did it. I know I did it. But I guess it's lost to time. But the answer to the question is yes, it works. And it's okay. I mean, it revolves around the Dragon Scale shield. You have to use the Dragon Scale shield to make it work. And it basically, you just get as many plus to skills. Raw plus to skills, not Paladin plus to skills. It has to be raw plus to skills. And once you have a massive amount of plus to skills, negative resistance, the Fire Sunder, like all sorts of interesting things, you can make it work. I'm pretty sure he's the character that I made. Like, I know I can't find the video, but he's up here. Maybe that's what I named it. Maybe I just named it the name of the character. And if I can find the name of the character, maybe I'll find the video. Yes, Mr. Dusty Buns. Big old silly butt. Flaming Cheeto Porcupine. Yeah, his name is GGM Hydra. Okay, well that doesn't help me at all. That helps me out, not any. Looks like I stripped him, unfortunately. He's been stripped of gear. I might be able to restore him. Let me see if I can restore him from my backups. See if his file is still intact. Live recordings, Holy Long Wang, means that I am recording videos live, not that this is a recording. So we are doing live recordings. Let me see if that restored him or not. I'm going to have to find him in the list. It was a long time ago that I did that video. Now I'm going to have to find it too, because I don't know where the hell it is. The video. No, I did not restore him. He's still not using the correct equipment. I must have messed with him at some point and did something to change him around. I don't know. I probably set him up as a Holy Fire Paladin or something, so it looks like that character's gone forever. Looks like he's gone forever. Which means that if I didn't get a recording of him, then he doesn't exist anymore. Sad. That's very sad. Boom, 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 boom. Man, I got lots of theory crafts up here. Fire's on, Max CB's on, Bone Slayer Blade, Theorycraft Elementress, the Bowenmancer version 2, the Badgerine of the Starmen, Theory crafting the Ultimate Sanic to Hooge Poison Bomb Necro, the Sherman Tank, the Spreading Plague, the Procazon, the Rabid Wolf Pack, the Bowenmancer version 1. Boom, 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 boom. Why you always gotta test? You're a big silly Chinchilla. That's right, I said it. No clue. The Holy Shock variant? It's basically just the difference between running Holy Shock natively and running Holy Shock with Dreams. So we actually theorized that a native Holy Shock Paladin is actually more powerful than a Dream Holy Shock Paladin, and it actually does work out stronger because you can build Holy Shock higher. You can get more negative resistance because you're not restricted from using Griffin's Eye. There's definitely some very interesting ways that you can make it work. Yeah, go for the eyes, boo. Go for the eyes. He's definitely going for the eyes. Stream is choppy. Your butt's choppy. How about that? How about that? Your butt is choppy. Mr. Silly Butt. Come here. Come here. Come here, Mr. Silly Butt. What are you doing? What are you doing? Mr. Dusty Bones. What are you doing, Mr. Dusty Bones? Lord Jesus. Show us the helicopter. He's a chonky boy. I don't know if he can do the helicopter no more. He's got the chonky butt. He got the chonky booty. The booty chonks. He got the chonky butt. Look at that big chonky butt. Look at it. Look at it. Chonky butt. He got the chonky butt. Him's a heckin' chonks. Can I get a chonk emote in chat? Chonk, 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 chonk. There, the chonkers. Alright, what's next on the list? Molten Boulder. Let's look up Molten Boulder and let's refresh our memory, shall we? From the Molten of the Boulder. Unleashes a slow-moving boulder which applies physical and fire damage on collision and explosion, which can knock back targets and leaves fire in its path and aftermath. The boulder rolls for 100 frames, which is 4 seconds total, and applies its damage and knockback every frame for 99 frames to targets with which it collides. So it applies that knockback every frame of the 100 frames that it is. So every time it hits a target, it will knock them back. However, due to its movement and knockback, damage will be applied much less often to any particular target. 50% knockback is applied to a small and medium targets. If these targets aren't knocked back, then the boulder will roll through them until it expires. At most, average damage per second against these targets is a little more than double displayed damage when continuously cast. However, damage only approaches maximum if the targets are prevented from being knocked back while the boulder rolls through them, or are lined up perfectly to be continuously knocked back after casting at close range. Knockback is applied in the direction away from the caster's current position, so moving after casting may result in targets being knocked back out of or back into the boulder's path. Interesting. Boulders explode on expiry and on impact with large targets, and those cannot be knocked back. Physical and fire damage apply within radius, and fire lingers afterward. While the boulder's damage and knockback can be prevented by blocking, the explosion's damage cannot. Although the explosion radius is slightly larger than that of Meteor, which the 18 fires which spawn within that radius after the explosion are in the same locations. Interesting. So it's the same fire damage as Meteor. Displayed fire damage per second is calculated based on 3 fires left in the boulder's path or the aftermath of its explosion, applying their bit rate every frame of a 3 by... While each fire applies fire bit rate for 36 frames. And size 1 targets can stand or move over up to 3 fires. Size 2 and 3 targets can stand or move over up to 5 fires. Thus, actual fire damage per second may be greater than displayed. Displayed fire damage per second is calculated as though fire skill damage applies, but it does not. What about audio? What's wrong with my audio? Got chinchilla fur in my mouth. What's the matter, buddy? You having a bad day? Come here. Come here. What's the matter? What's the matter, buddy? He's tired? Are you tired? You going to the night? You want to do the night? What's chinchilla floof? See? See this? Chinchilla floof. You see it? Alright, let's start the next video. See if we can get this on the show. Alright, 3, 2, 1, let's jam. Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we have Mr. Dusty Bones with us. He's a little sleepy today, it seems like. He's a little tired. That's okay. He can sleep here with me. Today we're going to be going over another one of the Fire Druid abilities. Yesterday we covered Firestorm, or last episode rather. Today we're going to be covering a Molten Boulder. So Molten Boulder is a rather odd one because it's not just fire damage, like Fissure or Firestorm, which are both only fire damage. Molten Boulder has many different aspects, actually, to it, including explosions, fire damage, and believe it or not, actually Meteor's fire damage. It's actually the same exact fire damage that Meteor has. So how does Molten Boulder work, and is it a good ability? Let's go over it together. So first off, Molten Boulder has a 1-second casting delay. As you can clearly see, I cannot cast it more than every 1 second, plus my current casting delay. So the way that delayed abilities work is that the casting delay is equivalent to the number of frames that it would take for that casting delay to have effect. So 1 second is equivalent to 25 frames, and my casting speed might be, say, let's say 7 frames. And if I'm running a 7-frame casting speed on my druid, then that is 25 frames plus 7, which is my current faster cast speed, which is going to give me my total cast delay. So the faster my casting speed is, the better I'll be able to cast it, but the delay will always be there. It's never going to go away. Now, Molten Boulder has a lot of different aspects to it, and it's kind of a complicated ability. First off, as you can clearly see, it leaves a fire trail. So the fire trail that it leaves is a separate damage all on its own. So anything that stands in that fire is essentially taking something similar to what Firewall does on the Sorceress. Then on top of that, we also have a explosion when it actually hits the target, or when it ends. That explosion is a damage type all on its own. The explosion is the physical damage number that's written here, which is 1,536 to 1,696. So that is the physical damage. Then, after the explosion, a fire damage is actually put on the ground, which has the same exact shape as Meteor's fire damage. That fire damage is separate from the explosion. On top of this, we also have a on-hit damage, which is another effect of Molten Boulder. So when you actually use it on a target, it will actually hit the target physically as it passes the target by. So we've got multiple different damage types. And if we count them out, it's actually kind of crazy. We have a firewall, that's number 1. We have a on hit, that's number 2. We have an explosion, that's number 3. We have a fire damage meteor effect that hits the ground, that's number 4. And then on top of that, it can hit a target multiple times as it travels because it can knock them back. So if you knock a target back, the Molten Boulder can hit them again for a second hit of physical damage, which basically makes it dish out 5 different damage hits, essentially, on a target. And if it knocks them back multiple times in a straight line, it can actually hit them more than 2 times, which is pretty crazy. However, there is something interesting to note about the knockback effect. So the knockback effect is actually going to knock the character away from where you are currently standing. But, as you can clearly see, the Molten Boulder takes a while to reach its final destination, which means that I could cast the ability and run here. Okay, now what does that mean? Well, if I cast the ability and then run on the other side of the Molten Boulder when it hits the target, it's going to knock them away from me in the opposite direction of the way the Molten Boulder is actually traveling. So you can actually control the direction that it knocks the target back by controlling the positioning of the druid itself to make sure that you're standing where you want them to get knocked to. So if I cast it here, but I want them to go to the left, all I would have to do is cast it and then move my character to the left, and when they get hit, they will get knocked back to the left. Or similarly, if I wanted them to go to the right, I would move to the left and they would get knocked back to the right. I could also potentially have them knocked in this direction by simply moving on the other side of the Molten Boulder before it hit them. So cast it and literally run over here to this side, and then the monsters would get knocked this way instead, which is actually quite silly. So if you're trying to knock the monster back in a specific direction, remember that your position as a druid actually has a lot to do with how the particular skill will knock the monster back. So which direction the monster is going to get knocked is in direct correlation to where you're standing. On top of this, it's a very nice ability to utilize with at range, because it does have a very nice ranged effect. Obviously, you can hit targets from pretty far away with this. It has a nice little splash damage. You can knock targets back with it, which does make it fairly nice as a defensive ability as well. So as you can clearly see, I can utilize it to get monsters to move away from me. However, there is some notes about the knockback effect. So the knockback effect only works on size 1 and size 2 monsters. It will not work on size 3 monsters. This is important. So size 3 monsters are things like Urdars, Pit Lords, monsters that have, an exceedingly large bodice. Those monsters cannot be knocked back by Molten Boulder. Let me see if I can find some of those real quick. We do not have them here. Let's try Frigid Highlands. Sometimes there's some size 3 monsters here. There we go. So we've got some size 3 monsters on the list. And as you can see, no matter how hard I try, the poorest Thorn Hulks are not going to get knocked back by my Molten Boulder. So this is unfortunate when it comes to size 3 monsters, but they are not going to be affected by this particular ability. Now, there's a lot going on with the way that this ability works, and because of the way that fire damage applies to targets, it will actually dish out more damage, specifically to larger monsters than smaller ones. So larger monsters tend to take more fire damage from Molten Boulder than the smaller ones. And in fact, there's a lot of strategy involved in utilizing the ability to get maximum damage output, and it involves basically the number of times that it can hit the monster, the knocking the monster back, whether or not they stay in a straight line. There's a lot that goes on with Molten Boulder, but it can actually dish out some pretty good damage. What can you do to maximize damage output with Molten Boulder? Well, the unfortunate thing is that because of the casting delay on Molten Boulder, there's really nothing you can do to make it like super duper amazing. What you're going to want to do with Molten Boulder is you're going to want to utilize other abilities with it. Because when it's on casting delay, you really can't do anything during that time period. So generally what you're going to do is you're going to do things like cast Volcanoes in between, or you're going to cast Fissure in between. So you're going to do things like Fissure, Molten Boulder, Fissure, Molten Boulder, Fissure, Molten Boulder. And you're going to keep going back and forth like that. This will allow you to get maximum damage output by weaving in all of the other skills as well. Now, this is something that they changed back in the weaving patch. That's what I'm going to call it, the weaving patch. So it used to be there was a global cooldown across all skills. And so things like this 4-second volcano casting delay would cause, unfortunately, things like Molten Boulder to go on a really long cooldown. And they have completely removed that. So Fire Druid has actually become very interesting now, whereas before it was kind of a laughingstock because it was very difficult to actually build Fire Druid properly. Because if you wanted to use Volcano, well, guess what? Volcano would lock out all your other fire skills for the full duration of the casting delay, which was 4 seconds. Or if you wanted to utilize Fissure, which has a duration casting delay of 2 seconds, that would lock you out of all the skills, all the other skills for 2 seconds. And so it was kind of a pain in the butt. But now you can actually weave in all of the skills together, so you can effectively use things like Fissure, Volcano, Molten Boulder, Firestorm, Fissure, Volcano, Molten Boulder, Firestorm, Fissure, Volcano, Molten Boulder, Firestorm, and you could weave them all together in a beautiful, like, cacophony of ridiculousness. And each one literally doing its own thing. Like, it's actually kind of silly because they all just kind of do their own thing, and that's really the truth of it. It's interesting because Volcano and Fissure really kind of pair well together because they're both abilities that can be cast on the target at a range. You don't have to actually be there. You don't actually have to do anything. Firestorm and Armageddon really kind of require you to be close up to the target. So if you're not close up to the target with those two abilities, you tend to be kind of not getting the optimal damage output because Armageddon is in a circle around you, and Firestorm is unfortunately just not a very long-range ability. Kind of requires you to really hump the leg of the target that you're fighting. Molten Boulder is the only one of the fire tree that kind of does its own thing, and it's not really either. It actually works surprisingly well with either of them because, number one, if you're using it at a close range, you're going to notice a pretty nice effect because you're going to get the nice little fire explosion at the end. It's going to dish out pretty decent damage to anything that's far away or close. And it tends to pair really well with just about any of them. The other two really kind of require you to be at a specific place. So if you're trying to utilize all the abilities, you end up being kind of like a melee character, where to get the optimal damage output of everything, you've got to be literally standing right on top of the monster so that you can dish out maximum damage effects. There's really not a whole lot more to be said about Molten Boulder, except for to exemplify the fact that it is indeed half physical damage. A lot of people will focus really heavily on the fire side of this tree. But the truth of the matter is that the majority of the damage of this tree is actually physical. So, like, with the exception of Firestorm, which requires you to hump the monster's leg to actually get good effective at it, the only other pure fire skill is Fissure. All of the rest of the abilities in the tree, Molten Boulder, Volcano, and Armageddon, all have a 50% physical damage component, which hits pretty hard. And if you ignore that physical component, you end up with a subpar character. I mean, it's kind of what I learned as I was building this character, is that I couldn't just focus on fire. I had to enhance the physical element of the attacks as well, and that's one of the reasons why my mercenary is using an amp damage polearm, because amplify damage increases the physical damage of Molten Boulder, the physical damage of Volcano, and the physical damage of Armageddon, giving me a pretty nice physical damage bump along with the fire damage, and helps me take care of pretty much any monster that's fire immune, or mostly fire immune, because obviously I get much less fire damage versus fire immune targets versus when they're not fire immune. When I first started, was utilizing Firestorm as my main ability. That was the one that I cast basically before everything. And I kind of fell out of love with it really quickly because it just doesn't really have the chutzpah to dish out the damage that I would like, and oftentimes I was way too weak to stand close enough to get the optimal effect from it. And I'm not saying that it doesn't dish out good damage, but it does require you to be very close, and this can often be an issue, especially if you're having trouble with survivability. Molten Boulder, on the other hand, which I think is the other option between the two, because it's the only other skill that you can put on your left click, by the way. Firestorm and Molten Boulder are the only two that function as left-click abilities. Molten Boulder functions at a much greater range and offers a lot more flexibility in terms of positioning, whereas Firestorm just kind of, like, doesn't go as far, doesn't hit for as much damage. It's actually 1/3 of what it actually states, by the way. So if you actually take a look at Firestorm, it says 6,000 damage per second. It's actually 6,000 divided by 3, with each tine of the Firestorm dishing out 1/3 of the damage output. So it's not actually dishing out 6,000 per tine, it's dishing out 1/3 of that per tine. And all 3 tines have to hit the target for you to get the full damage output of the ability. To give you a kind of like an example, like I could cast this at these guys, and if it does happen to go underneath of them where all 3 tines hit the target, the damage output is actually quite decent. But it does require me to be a lot closer than I would like. Which is why I just generally like to spam Molten Boulder instead. Although, as I was talking about earlier, you kind of spam everything anyway. So it's really just a priority list. So like, what is your priority ability? What would you consider your second priority ability, and so forth and so on. And so what it ended up being for me specifically was my priority was Volcano. I wanted to make sure that Volcano was up all the time, and Fissure. Those were my 2 priorities. So Armageddon is something that you just cast and you forget. You don't even think about it. It lasts for 50 seconds, and you just cast it every now and then to refresh it. So basically what I would do is I would always cast Volcano first, then Fissure, and then I would rotate between Molten Boulder and Firestorm. And then eventually I would obviously recast Fissure and recast Volcano as those cooldowns became available. And it really makes for a very hectic and very ridiculous just menagerie of abilities, because once you have everything going, I mean, it's just tons and tons and tons of fire effects all over the screen. It's very messy. Like, it's a very messy character, in my opinion. It's also very loud, by the way. One of the things that I laughed about was I was like, man, this character is very loud. It's a very loud character. None of these abilities, by the way, can be used while in shapeshifted form, although there are some interesting ways that you can potentially get them in shapeshifted form. Firestorm has a very interesting use case scenario with the Phoenix rune word. You can get Phoenix rune words that actually have it as a proc chance, and it's actually not terrible. Molten Boulder also similarly is on the word destruction, and you can get some pretty decent proc chances with that. And there's also the 25% chance to cast Fissure on Earthshifter. So, like, if you did want to go with a kind of like a melee build, and as we were talking about earlier, Armageddon and Firestorm are really abilities that see their best use in melee. These tend to work better when it comes to those objects. However, Molten Boulder coming from Destruction is actually very interesting as well, and that one also spams volcanoes, by the way. I have a whole video on that if you want to take a look at my theory craft for the Destruction Werewolf. That was actually pretty fun. There's really not a lot more to go over when it comes to Molten Boulder. It's a great ability. You weave it in with your other abilities. It does have physical damage, have fire. It has a very nice knockback effect, which makes it very defensive. And overall, just one of the mainstays of this particular build. It works better with both sides of the tree, the more melee side of the tree and the more ranged side of the tree. It can be used with either one to great effect, which makes it a very nice in-betweener skill that you can definitely get good effect from. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just yakking about Molten Boulder. As a funny little joke here, if you play Diablo 4, they took away the Molten, but they kept the Boulder. As always, thanks for watching. And keep watching. All right. Next. What do we got next? Fissure. Fissure is one of my favorites. Chinchilla? Yeah, Chinchilla is actually a Pikachu. If you look at Pikachu, if you actually pay attention to the way he moves and walks, it's obvious that the Pikachu was modeled after the Chinchilla.
Good evening.
Are you having fun sticking your nose out? I know you guys can't see him because he's down here. I know you can't see him. He sticks his little nose out of the hole. He thinks he's funny. Good morning. It's 11:41 p.m. at night, Bootos. It's 11:41 p.m. at night. To think I would be good morning by BHUTAS 1984. That's a Lord of the Rings reference, by the way. Alright, let's pull up Fissure. Let's reread some information on it, refresh my memories. Yep, cracks open to ground. Size 3 cracks will open randomly within the limits of the 10-yard square. During the following 80 frames, 3.2 seconds, beginning in the first frame and every 6 seconds thereafter. In total, 14 cracks will open. Ah, yes, cracks. Each crack my crack is definitely not something you want to have open. Each crack remains open for 84 frames, 3.3 seconds. That's a long time. A lot of stuff can squeak out in 3.36 seconds, okay? Let me tell you what. I have been in that situation, and you don't want your crack to open for 3.36 seconds or even 1 second. A lot of stuff can pop out in 3.36 seconds. It applies to targets that stand or move above them. Next delay targets. Targets can only be damaged by once every 6 frames, so multiply the fire damage by 25 divided by 6 for maximum fire damage per second. Since the cracks have less collide, enabled each crack can normally only apply its damage to once to a single target, so it would have to move over multiple cracks for maximum fire damage per second. However, 2 targets that are close enough together to stand over the same cracks will receive maximum fire damage per second, since the last target alternates. Crackety crack crackin' crackos. I can see we got a lot of crack jokes coming in the future. Many crack joke doth come. Many crack joke. I'm gonna fart out of my crack. How about that? Get a little cracks. All the cracks everywhere. 3, 2, 1, let's jam. Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be going over another one of the Fire Druid skills. Recently we went over Firestorm and Molten Boulder, and now we're going to be going over my personal favorite, which is Fissure. Fissure is actually best described by talking about Blizzard, believe it or not. For those of you who've ever played a Blizzard Sorceress, Fissure is essentially the same thing as Blizzard. It is the fire version of Blizzard. It functions the same way. It has multiple effects that come out on the ground. It is about a 10-yard radius, by the way. In that 10-yard radius, the cracks can appear at random in that particular area, and you can obviously cast it multiple times, overlapping multiple cracks, which is definitely not something I would recommend in the real world, but you can definitely overlap multiple cracks. Now the problem with this, just like the problem with Blizzard, is that sometimes a monster can stand in just the right spot and, well, not get hit by any of them. We also had some next hit delay changes, which have made it so that the monsters can actually get hit multiple times by this ability, which is interesting. But there is also more issues with the ability. So since the ability is a 10-yard radius and spawns the little cracks in the 10-yard radius, it also has some unfortunate side effects in areas with less than a stellar ground space. So if there is less than stellar ground space, what this means is that, well, you won't get all your cracks. So there's a chance that some of your cracks will spawn off of the general area. And also, as you can see, this particular monster kind of avoided some of the damage because he just kind of was standing in just the right spot. This means that the damage the ability does is often random because, well, you don't necessarily know whether or not, you know, the